Be crazy to me that I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation, but the rest of the world doesn't, aren't we
Yeah,
just
it puts
putting
them at a
ourselves?
competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
So
And we're seeing this already. I don't think people realize that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
yes,
What does that do? That gives us a productivity disadvantage?
yes.
Like,
What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works, run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we got.
so free for all.
Well, what we've got is sort of, we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us. It's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's
So I've
long-term.
distinguished these two kinds of risk.
Yeah.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI. There's cyber attacks. So between 2023 and 2024, they increased by about a factor of 1,200%. And that's probably because these large language models make it much easier to do phishing attacks.
And a phishing attack, for anyone that doesn't know, is
They send you something saying, hi, I'm your friend John and I'm stuck in El Salvador. Could you just wire this money? That's one kind of attack.
Yeah.
But the phishing attacks are really trying to get your logon credentials.
And now with AI, they can clone my voice, my image.
They can do all that.
I'm struggling at the moment because there's a bunch of AI scams on X and also Meta. And there's one in particular on Meta, so Instagram, Facebook.
Lethal autonomous weapons.
Lethal autonomous weapons.
That means things that can kill you and make their own decision about whether to kill you.
Which is the great dream, I guess, of the military industrial complex, of being able to create such weapons.
So the worst thing about them is big, powerful countries always have the ability to invade smaller, poorer countries. They're just more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do that using actual soldiers, you get bodies coming back in bags, and the relatives of the soldiers who were killed don't like it. So you get something like Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, there's a lot of protest at home. If instead of bodies coming back in bags, it was dead robots, there'd be much less protest, and the military industrial complex would like it much more because robots are expensive. And suppose you had something that could get killed and was expensive to replace. That would be just great. Big countries can invade small countries much more easily because they don't have their soldiers being killed.
And the risk here is that these robots will malfunction, or they'll just be more...
No, that's even if the robots do exactly what the people who built the robots want them to do, the risk is that it's going to make big countries invade small countries more often.
More often because they can.
Yeah, and it's not a nice thing to do.
So it brings down the friction of war.
It brings down the cost of doing an invasion.
Mm. And these machines will be smarter at warfare as well. So they'll be
well,
better.
Even when the machines aren't smarter. So the lethal autonomous weapons, they can make them now. And I think all the big defense departments are busy making them. Even if they're not smarter than people, they're still very nasty, scary things.
Because I'm thinking that, they could show just a picture, go get this guy.
Yeah.
And go take out anyone he's been texting. And this little wasp.
So 2 days ago, I was visiting. In the past, new technologies have come in which didn't lead to joblessness. New jobs were created. So the classic example people use is automatic teller machines. When automatic teller machines came in, a lot of bank tellers didn't lose their jobs. They just got to do more interesting things. But here, I think this is more like when they got machines in the Industrial Revolution, and you can't have a job digging ditches now because a machine can dig ditches much better than you can. Mm. And I think for mundane intellectual labor, AI is just going to replace everybody. Now, it may well be in the form of you have fewer people using AI assistants. So it's a combination of a person and an AI assistant are now doing the work that 10 people could do previously.
People say that it will create new jobs, though, so we'll be fine.
Yes, and that's been the case for other technologies, but this is a very different, maybe 100 bits. It's very little information. We're lucky if we're transferring like 10 bits a second. These things are transferring trillions of bits a second. So they're billions of times better than us at sharing information. And that's because they're digital, and you can have 2 bits of hardware using the connection strengths in exactly the same way. We're analog and you can't do that. Your brain's different from my brain. And if I could see the connection strengths between all your neurons, it wouldn't do me any good because my neurons work slightly differently and they're connected up slightly differently. So when you die, all your knowledge dies with you. When these things die, suppose you take these 2 digital intelligences that are clones of each other and you destroy the hardware they run on. As long as you've stored the connection strength somewhere, you can just build new hardware that executes the same instructions. So it'll know how to use those connection strengths, and you've recreated that intelligence. So they're immortal. We've actually solved the problem of immortality. And it was while I was doing that work that I began to really realize how much better digital is for sharing information.
Was there a eureka moment?
There was a eureka month or two, and it was a sort of coupling of ChatGPT coming out, although Google had very similar things a year earlier, and I'd seen those, and that had a big effect on me. The closest I had to a eureka moment was when a Google system called Palm was able to say why a joke was funny. And I'd always thought of that as a kind of landmark. If it can say why a joke's funny, it really does understand. And it could say why a joke was funny. And that, coupled with realizing why digital is so much better than analog for sharing information, suddenly made me very interested in AI safety and that these things were going to get a lot smarter than us.
Why did you leave Google?
The main reason I left Google was because I was 75 and I wanted to retire. I've done a very bad job of that. The precise timing of when I left Google was so that I could talk freely at a conference at MIT. But I left because I'm old and I was finding it harder to program. I was making many more mistakes when I programmed, which was very annoying.
You wanted to talk freely at a conference at MIT.
Yes, at MIT, organized by MIT Tech Review.
What did you want to talk about freely?
AI safety.
And you couldn't do that while you were at Google?
Well, I could have done it while I was at Google, and Google encouraged me to stay and work on AI safety and said I could do whatever I liked on AI safety. You kind of censor yourself. If you work for a big company, you don't feel right saying things that'll damage the big company. Even if you could get away with it, it just feels wrong to me. I didn't leave because I was cross with anything Google was doing. I think Google actually behaved very responsibly. When they had these big chatbots, they didn't release them, possibly because they were worried about their reputation.
You can tell us what you want this show to be, who you want us to interview, and the types of conversations you would love us to have. But remember, for now, we're only inviting the first 10,000 people that join before it closes. So if you want to join our private closed community, head to the link in the description below or go to doaccircle.com. I will speak to you then.
I'm continually shocked by the types of individuals that listen to this conversation because they come up to me sometimes. So I hear from politicians, I hear from some rural people, I hear from entrepreneurs all over the world, whether they are the entrepreneurs building some of the biggest companies in the world or they're, early stage startups. For those people that are listening to this conversation now, that are in positions of power and influence, world leaders, let's say, what's your message to them?
I'd say what you need is highly regulated capitalism. That's what seems to work best.
And what would you say to the average person? Doesn't work in the industry, somewhat concerned about the future, doesn't know if they're helpless or not. What should they be doing in their own lives?
My feeling
Ahead of us, what is the biggest threat you see to human happiness?
I think the joblessness is a fairly urgent short-term threat to human happiness. I think if you make lots and lots of people unemployed, even if they get universal basic income, they're not going to be happy.
Because they need purpose.
Because they need purpose, yes.
And struggle.
They need to feel they're contributing something, they're useful.
And do you think that outcome, that there's going to be huge job displacement, is more probable than not?
Yes, I do.
And what sort of
That one I think is definitely more probable than not. If I worked in a call center, I'd be terrified.
And what's the time frame for that in terms of mass job
I think it's
displacement?
beginning to happen already. I read an article in The Atlantic recently that said it's already getting hard for university graduates to get jobs. And part of that may be that people are already using AI for the jobs they would have got.